Narration 1023 is from Kafi. You know, the first book is the the usul of the belief. Now, specific duties of belief come in the second volume, but it talks about a group of jinn that remind you of tall or big greys, wearing big old cloaks and locust-like heads and kind of thinned out skin, and it totally makes me think of the greys and insectoids and some of the other descriptions of aliens that people have. But these beings, well, I mean, the jinn are totally, no matter what form they take on, the real difference, they're even alien compared to one's own soul. If one's encountered one's own spirit and soul, it's almost totally alien to the body, but the fire beings are totally different than the humans in that respect. But I understand where a lot of the alien stuff comes from in this regard. So narration 1206 talks about an elephant called Mahmud, the year that Muhammad was born, and perhaps, and so there was a conversation with the elephant by Muhammad's father, and so when the king from Ethiopia came to destroy the Kaaba, he called for, the guy's like, well, the house belongs to God, the camels belong to me. And if he would have said something different, maybe the Ethiopian prince would have been like, okay, he said, I might have decided not to do it were it not for that. But so perhaps the regard to this elephant was part of how Muhammad got his name. Narration 1213 points out that we can use numerology, and by analogy, I guess we could say other things, but let's remember that in Al-Kafi, of course, it mentions that you just don't use mere analogy. Of course, you have to regard the other stuff too. The outer sciences, the other more directly, spiritually, and revealed and inspired sciences, you could say. But the use of numerology to express religion and other sorts of symbolical ways of speaking is acceptable for secrecy and for other reasons. And narration 1345 talks about the sleep position. The prophets and such will sleep on their backs. The believers sleep on their right side. The hypocrites sleep on their left side. And the Satanists sleep on their belly. Now, people could have health conditions like, you have a damaged shoulder or something like that. You can't sleep in one position or other. That's different. But people who do these things without, it's a way to tell. Just like in the Sunni tradition, you don't interlace the fingers. Well, I don't have to illustrate that here. Can't really hold this phone at the same time. You don't stand with your hands on your hips, and you don't hang your, you don't sit around with your hands hanging over your belly for just whatever. You don't lay on your left side with your head propped up and. Narration 1342 regards a medical procedure that was God, that Jesus also got. A particular vein was found, white blood, or, they thought it was white blood, came out, but this is a cupping thing that was only done once. So that was Abu Muhammad al-Islam. Narration 1337 talks about firing people for sexual harassment, and, releasing from duty the people who've were sexually harassed. If there's a slave, and we should really implement this in regards to the prison system, because, if somebody doesn't need to be executed, they shouldn't have to put up with anything like this. But I think it was just sexual harassment in this case, but the slave was released. Now, let us remember that Islam does not allow wars to capture slaves. But in the Sunni tradition, if you don't strike the face and that sort of thing, if that happens to a slave, the slave is released. So, narration 1237 regards how that line is only supposed to be, the line of the innocents is only supposed to be washed by others of that line. And it talks about how Jesus' mother Mary, Maryam, was washed by Jesus. Narration 1241 talks about a 24-faced angel. And remember Surah 35, 2, 3, 4, and God adds to whatever he wants. So it doesn't limit the number of, angels. But it talks about how 22,000 years before Adam was, created as a physical being, Muhammad was thus identified. You do have the idea that the Imams, just like Muhammad, had a strange birthmark, so that Imam are said to have had that in regards to them. Narration 1279 regards Musa ibn Ja'far, and his mother was saved from abuse by those cursed people who went around capturing slaves, because Islam heaps curses upon those who start wars to capture slaves, to extend the borders, to gather up other sorts of wealth. That happens as part of the conquest, but anybody who starts wars for that purpose, and an important thing also in this book is, you have these lists of, you have a list of divine names, which qualities you're supposed to evoke from yourself and qualities you're not supposed to evoke from yourself. There's certain, and obviously God is beyond, these names which we know in creation, and that's probably made more explicit herein. But it's interesting that these names are listed with their opposites or their contraries in a way that causes one to think, oh, we're supposed to evoke this out of ourselves. These are supposed to be qualities that we are supposed to have. But